He was beaten with a bat in front of his wife after the end of the world. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the first and second episodes of the 7th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. As soon as this video gets 300 likes, I will release the next part. Enjoy watching it.
Heavy breathing and choked sobs are heard while Rick looks at the ground in shock. It becomes obvious that Negan has already chosen and killed his victim. Negan sneers, kneeling beside Rick with a bloody Lucille in his hand. "I'll kill you," Rick mutters. Negan asks him to repeat. "Not today, not tomorrow, but I will kill you," Rick repeats. Negan scoffs at the threat, then mentions how important it is for a leader to have a right hand, introducing Simon. Negan asks what kind of weapon Rick had. Simon gives Rick's axe to Negan, who then drags Rick inside the van. He informs the rescuers that if Rick returns without Negan, they can kill the rest of Rick's group. The bloody remains of the victim of Negan are visible on the ground. Negan smashes Rick's axe into the dining table of the van and sits in the driver's seat, with his back to Rick. He challenges Rick to kill him with an axe. Rick grabs him and rushes forward, but Negan turns around at the last second and points a machine gun at Rick. Negan orders him to drop the axe. He starts the van and drives off. Negan drives through heavy fog and smoke, teasing Rick with splashes of blood that walkers leave on the windshield. "Does it remind you of anyone you know?" Negan laughs, mocking Rick. Negan stops the van and is immediately surrounded by walkers. "You're mine, the people there, they're mine, and it's all mine," he explains to Rick. Negan then throws Rick's axe onto the roof of the van, ordering Rick to get it. Rick is still in shock and does not immediately move from his place. "Take my axe," Negan demands, pointing Lucille at Rick's face. Rick gets up and Negan pushes him out the door. As Rick fights the walkers through the thick morning fog, he remembers his band. He climbs up to the top of the van and sees that Negan has parked the van against a smoking log wall that the rescuers had previously used to block their path. The survivor from the library, left hanging on the overpass, has now turned. Rick thinks about Michonne and Carl, and then begins to lament, reliving the horror that just happened. Remembering the arrangement, Rick's group kneels while Negan ponders who to kill, playing his little counting game. He lingers and points hard at Abraham, showing that he is a victim. Abraham throws the last peace sign to a devastated Sasha before Negan brings down his head violently. "Suck my balls," Abraham says defiantly, getting to his feet, blood dripping down his face. Everyone in the group cries while Negan continuously beats Abraham. Negan pauses to mock Abraham's last words, and then proceeds to smash his head into a bloody mass. After finishing, Negan calls the group to look at his dirty girl, Lucille, who is now covered in Aubrey's blood and brains. Noting Rosita's extreme horror and suffering, Negan asks if she and Abraham were together, but Rosita is silent. Negan demands that she look at Lucille and starts screaming when Rosita refuses. Enraged, Daryl jumps to his feet and punches Negan in the face before he can be grabbed by two rescuers. Dwight points a crossbow at Daryl's head and asks Negan if he can kill Daryl, but Negan says no. As punishment for Daryl's misdemeanor, Negan reminds the group that resistance is always punished. He reminds them that although the first of them is free and unlike the others they may have encountered, he is a man of his word. He exclaims, "So, back to that," and then hits Lucille twice on Glenn's head. Maggie screams. Glenn manages to sit down again, and then it turns out that the force of the blows dented his skull and knocked out one eye. Maggie looks at her husband in horror. Negan mocks Glenn while he tries to talk. Eventually Glenn stutters, "Maggie, I'll find you." Negan seems to sincerely apologize for his actions, but then reminds the group that there are no exceptions, and continues. He beats Glenn to death in the same way as Abraham, until there is practically nothing left of his head, and a mass of bones, brain and flesh is still twitching in place of Glenn's corpse. In the present, Rick lies on the roof of the van, an axe next to him, and cries, remembering the terrible deaths of Glenn and Abraham. From inside the van, Negan shoots through the roof to hurry Rick up. Rick grabs an axe and jumps off the roof, grabbing a walker hanging on an overpass, but in doing so he drops the axe. The walkers swarm and grab Rick by the legs. Negan opens the window and shoots most of the walkers trying to grab Rick, but then the body of the hanging walker separates from the head, and Rick falls into the herd. Negan orders Rick to take the axe again. Rick finds the axe and returns to the van, while imagining the rest of the group remembering what hit Lucille. "Well done," says Negan and starts the van again. Negan drives the van back to the clearing where Rick's group is waiting for him. He removes the bloody axe and tells Rick that he is no longer in charge. "You can still lead a good productive life working for me," he says. He gives Rick the axe. "I think you're going to need it, I just have a hunch." Negan pushes Rick out of the van and drags him back to the rest of his group. He explains to Rick that the purpose of the trip was to change the way Rick sees him. However, Negan believes that Rick is still not afraid enough of him. Negan orders his men to put a gun to everyone's heads, pointing it at the nose to cause maximum confusion, and calls Carl to him. He wraps his arm with a belt as a tourniquet and tells Carl to lie face down on the ground. He draws a line on Carl's hand and gives Rick an ultimatum. Rick must cut off Carl's hand or everyone will die, including everyone in Alexandria. Rick is terrified. Michonne pleads with Negan, explaining that they now understand his new world order. Negan agrees that the others can understand, but Rick still doesn't understand. Rick begs Negan to let him take Carl's place, but an impatient Negan starts counting down from 3. On the count of 2, Rick continues to beg and starts crying. "Dad, just do it," Carl whispers. Enraged, Rick brings the support, but Negan stops him at the very last second. "You answer to me, you provide for me, you belong to me," he demands, slapping Rick in the face. "I'm providing for you," Rick agrees, completely broken and nervous. Satisfied with Rick's broken expression, Negan gives up. Negan tells Dwight to put Daryl back in the van. He explains to Rick that Daryl is mine, and if he tries to do anything else, he will force Rick to disfigure Daryl. "Welcome to a new beginning, you pathetic sack of shit," exclaims Negan. He leaves the truck with Rick's group so they can transfer the goods they have to produce for him. He says he'll be back for their first offering in a week and leaves scoffing. Rick's group was numb with shock and grief when the rescuers left. One of the rescuers takes a photo of Glenn's body. In the end, Maggie struggles to her feet. Rick tells her they have to take her to Hilltop's doctor, but she insists that they all go back to Alexandria and get ready for the fight. Rick objects, saying that the Savior now has Daryl and an entire army, and they will all die if they follow him. The group insists on continuing to Hilltop, but Maggie demands that they not follow her. Sasha volunteers to go with Maggie. "I'm taking him with me," Maggie says, referring to Glenn. She crouches next to Glenn, sobbing, and then hugs Carl. Sasha gently tells Rosita that she is also going to take Abraham. Rosita nods, and the two women hold hands over Abraham's body. The group gathers around Maggie, begging her to let them help her. "He's our family too," Rick says of Glenn. Maggie gives up and lets them move the body. Sasha, Rosita and Eugene lift Abraham's body, while Carl, Rick, Michonne and Aaron carry Glenn. Rick remembers Negan saying that you all thought you'd grow old together. As these words echo in Rick's head, he imagines an idyllic scene. His group is having a peaceful dinner together in the fresh air in Alexandria. Glenn is sitting at the head of the table, holding his little son in his arms. Abraham is sitting next to him, and they exchange a meaningful, happy look. Rick is preparing to return to Alexandria. He picks up the axe when a walker approaches him, but he ignores him and gets into the van. Rick looks in the side view mirror as he drives away. He sees the walker fall to the ground and eat the remains of Glenn and Abraham's blood. Carol regains consciousness in a horse-drawn carriage. Her wounds are fresh, it's only been a few hours since Roman repeatedly shot her. The men on horseback, who had previously offered Carol medical care, drive the cart, and Morgan walks next to the cart and Carol falls asleep again. She wakes up disoriented. She sees Morgan fighting the walkers with the help of men on horseback. In a state of hallucination, she confuses walkers with people. Weak and upset, she runs away. She stumbles into a cemetery and approaches the abandoned caretaker's house. The old woman beckons her through the window until Carol suddenly realizes that the old woman is actually a decrepit walker. Several people arrive on horseback, just in time to kill the walkers that infest Carol. Carol wakes up in bed and Morgan tells her that she has been sleeping for 2 days. Outside, Morgan pushes Carol in a wheelchair and tells her that they are not under the name kingdom at all. Carol examines her surroundings. Children play in the streets, residents water the gardens. Morgan predicts that it will take her a week to recover from her wounds, after which they will be able to return to Alexandria. He tells her that the kingdom is ruled by a man who calls himself King Il, but does not specify the details. Morgan brings Carol to the theater hall, where his tiger Shiva is sitting on a throne, chained next to him. Dramatically introduces himself to Carol and welcomes her to the kingdom. Carol pretends to be in awe of the kingdom. And he discovers skepticism in Carol and tells about the numerous offerings of the kingdom, offering her a sanction. He offers her fruit, offering to take at least a pomegranate. Carol politely refuses and thanks Ezekiel. When they leave, Carol criticizes the kingdom, considering it an invention and a joke, and promises to leave as soon as she recovers. Morgan, Ezekiel and a small team leave the kingdom in 2 trucks. They drive several pigs into a room with a tied walker, where they begin to eat it. Morgan asks why they feed pigs to the walkers. Richard replies that he wants their bellies to be full of rot. A small herd of walkers begins to approach Ezekiel's group, and Richard instructs Benjamin, a teenager, to kill the nearest walker with a machete. Benjamin fights Hodak, and Ezekiel draws his sword and pierces his head. Richard tells Morgan to keep the pig hunt a secret from the people of the kingdom. Back in the kingdom, he praises Morgan's skill with a fighting stick and asks him to train Benjamin. Although Morgan is skeptical, he eventually agrees to train Benjamin, to the delight of IKEA. Morgan trains Benjamin in the gazebo. Carol travels around the kingdom and steals a hunting knife and a bar of chocolate from the table unnoticed. She distracts a man who folds laundry and steals clothes from the table. Morgan and Benjamin train, and Ezekiel watches them, impressed by what he saw. Morgan and Benjamin take a break from training. Benjamin asks Morgan to lend him a book of the art of the world, as he has read all the books in the kingdom and wants to read something new. Isel also comes up and asks them to join him. Richard tells Morgan to take a gun with him. Morgan, Icky and a small team are waiting in the parking lot with a load of slaughtered pigs. There is a group of saviors. Gavin, the leader of the group, counts the pigs and is pleased to find that they are larger than the previous batch. Richard notices that the pigs were well fed. When Diana, a resident of the kingdom, begins to explain to Morgan who the saviors are, he declares with a note of anger in his voice that he knows who they are. While they are loading, the savior Jared picks a fight with Richard, and orders his men to put down their guns, and Gavin tells Jared to stop hitting Richard and reminds him of how well he treated them. Gavin reminds Keel that next week is production week. He warns from Keel that Richard will be the first to die if they deliver less than they asked for. In the kingdom, Morgan has lunch in the cafeteria with Benjamin and Henry, Benjamin's younger brother. He explains that Ezekiel is keeping the deal with the saviors a secret because she is worried that the residents will want to fight despite being outnumbered. He asks if Morgan is against killing after reading the pacifist inscription in The Art of Peace. Morgan tells him that sometimes he changes his mind. Later, Morgan brings food to Carol's room and finds it empty. That evening, Ezekiel finds Carol picking fruit in the garden as she prepares to leave the kingdom. She assumes her humble appearance until Iz gently tells her not to talk nonsense. She sheds her disguise and says she thinks he's a buffoon. And he sits down next to Carol and tells her in his normal voice that this is human nature, people follow another leader to feel safe. He adopted the image of a king and languages in order to make people in the kingdom feel safe, using his experience as an amateur theater artist for this. He goes on to say that, despite the heroic stories, before the apocalypse he was a zookeeper, and Shiva was an exhibit. He saved her after she suffered a leg injury. Carol still wants to leave the kingdom, so she comes up with a plan so she can go and not leave. The next day, Morgan accompanies Carol to the cemetery. Carol enters the cottage and kills the old woman Hodak. She buries her on the street, among the tombstones. When Carol is lighting a fire in the fireplace of her new home, there is a knock on the door. This is Izaki or Shiva. He offers her pomegranates, telling her how delicious they are, and she smiles.